On the morning of October 7, 2023, the world watched in disbelief as Hamas launched a surprise attack on Israel. The assault, unprecedented in its scale and ferocity, shattered decades of relative calm and plunged the region into a new era of conflict. From their positions in the Gaza Strip, Hamas militants unleashed a barrage of rockets, targeting Israeli cities and towns. Simultaneously, Hamas fighters infiltrated Israel's border, engaging in fierce ground battles with Israeli defense forces. The attackers struck military installations, civilian communities, and even a music festival, causing widespread panic and chaos. The audacity and coordination of the attack stunned Israeli intelligence and military officials, who had clearly underestimated Hamas's capabilities. The attack, which Hamas dubbed Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, marked a significant escalation in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It shattered the illusion of a negotiated peace and exposed the deep-seated animosity that continues to fester between the two sides. The world held its breath, bracing for Israel's inevitable and likely devastating response. Israel's response to the Hamas attack was swift and merciless. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared war, vowing to unleash the full might of the IDF against Hamas and its infrastructure in Gaza. Israeli warplanes roared into action, pounding Gaza with a relentless bombing campaign. Targets included suspected Hamas command centers, rocket launchers, and tunnels. But the strikes also resulted in heavy civilian casualties and widespread destruction. Residential buildings, mosques, and hospitals were reduced to rubble, leaving thousands of Gazans homeless and desperate. As the Israeli offensive intensified, so too did the rocket fire from Gaza. Hamas and other militant groups continued to rain rockets on Israeli cities, forcing millions of Israelis to seek shelter in bomb shelters. The relentless barrages crippled daily life in Israel, shutting down schools, businesses, and transportation systems. The conflict quickly spiraled into a full-blown war, with no end in sight.
The scale of the attack was unprecedented. We had to respond with full force to protect our citizens and dismantle Hamas's capabilities. But the cost in terms of human lives and destruction has been immense.
As the conflict between Israel and Hamas raged on, a new and dangerous front emerged: southern Lebanon. Hezbollah, the powerful Iranian-backed Shiite militia, threw its weight behind Hamas, launching rockets and cross-border raids into northern Israel. Israel responded with artillery fire and airstrikes on suspected Hezbollah positions in southern Lebanon, raising fears of a wider regional conflict. The involvement of Hezbollah dramatically escalated the stakes of the conflict, transforming what was initially an Israeli-Palestinian confrontation into a multi-party war.
Hezbollah's entry into the conflict was a calculated move, aimed at diverting Israeli resources and bolstering Hamas's position. However, it also carried the risk of igniting a broader conflagration, potentially dragging Syria and Iran into a direct confrontation with Israel. The international community watched with growing apprehension as the conflict threatened to spiral out of control.
The renewed conflict with Israel had devastating consequences for Lebanon, a country already grappling with a crippling economic crisis and political instability. Southern Lebanon, which bore the brunt of the Israeli retaliation, was plunged into chaos. Thousands of Lebanese civilians fled their homes, seeking refuge in safer areas further north. The fighting disrupted essential services, including electricity, water, and healthcare, exacerbating the humanitarian crisis. The conflict also had a crippling impact on Lebanon's already fragile economy. The closure of Beirut's airport and the disruption of trade routes dealt a severe blow to the country's vital tourism and import-export sectors. The Lebanese lira plummeted to new lows against the US dollar, further fueling inflation and pushing more people into poverty.
We were already struggling to make ends meet, and now, with the conflict, everything has become even more difficult. People are losing hope, and the future looks so uncertain. Section 5. Beirut under siege. The cost of war. While the fighting was concentrated in southern Lebanon, the capital city of Beirut was not spared from the devastation of war.
Israeli airstrikes targeted Hezbollah facilities and infrastructure in and around the city, causing significant damage and loss of life. The port of Beirut, still reeling from the catastrophic explosion of 2020, was once again paralyzed by the conflict.
The relentless bombing campaign sowed fear and panic among Beirut's residents, who were forced to relive the horrors of past conflicts. Hospitals, already overwhelmed with casualties from the south, struggled to cope with the influx of wounded civilians.
The conflict exacerbated the already dire humanitarian situation in Lebanon, leaving millions of people in need of food, water, shelter, and medical assistance. The international community scrambled to provide aid, but their efforts were hampered by the ongoing fighting and the widespread destruction of infrastructure. Section 6. The world reacts, calls for calm and restraint. The international community reacted to the escalating conflict with a mixture of condemnation, concern, and calls for restraint.
The United Nations Security Council held emergency meetings to address the crisis, but their efforts to broker a ceasefire were repeatedly met with resistance from both sides.
The United States, while reaffirming its unwavering support for Israel's right to defend itself, also urged Israel to exercise restraint and avoid civilian casualties.
European leaders condemned Hamas attacks while also expressing concern over the humanitarian situation in Gaza.
Russia, a key player in the region, called for an immediate ceasefire and a return to dialogue.
Arab states, traditionally critical of Israel, found themselves divided, with some expressing support for Hamas while others urging all sides to show restraint.
Section 7. A humanitarian catastrophe. The urgency for peace. As the conflict raged on, the humanitarian situation in both Gaza and Lebanon deteriorated rapidly.
In Gaza, the relentless Israeli bombing campaign created a humanitarian catastrophe of epic proportions. Hundreds of thousands of Gazans were displaced from their homes, seeking refuge in overcrowded UN shelters where they faced shortages of food, water, and medicine.
Hospitals, already stretched to their limits before the conflict, were overwhelmed with casualties, and medical supplies dwindled dangerously low.
The International Committee of the Red Cross warned of a humanitarian disaster unfolding before our eyes and called for an immediate ceasefire to allow for the delivery of essential aid.
In Lebanon, the situation was equally dire, particularly in the south, where the fighting had displaced tens of thousands of people. The Lebanese government, already grappling with an economic meltdown and political paralysis, struggled to provide for its own citizens, let alone the influx of refugees. Section 8. Iran's shadow. A looming threat. Looming over the conflict was the shadow of Iran, the region's Shia powerhouse and a staunch supporter of both Hamas and Hezbollah.
While Iran denied direct involvement in the conflict, Israel and the United States accused Tehran of providing financial, military, and logistical support to its proxies in Gaza and Lebanon.
The conflict raised fears of a wider regional conflagration, with the potential to draw Iran into a direct confrontation with Israel.
The United States, seeking to prevent such an escalation, deployed additional naval forces to the eastern Mediterranean as a show of force and a deterrent to Iran.
However, the risk of miscalculation and escalation remained high. Any Iranian retaliation against Israel or US interests in the region could quickly spiral out of control with potentially catastrophic consequences. Section 9. The road ahead towards a fragile peace. As the conflict entered its second month, there were glimmers of hope for a ceasefire, however fragile.
Egypt, long a mediator between Israel and Hamas, intensified its diplomatic efforts, shuttling between the warring parties in an attempt to find common ground.
The United States, under pressure from the international community and growing unease at home, also stepped up its diplomatic engagement, urging both sides to agree to a ceasefire and return to the negotiating table.
However, significant obstacles remained. Hamas, emboldened by its initial attack and seeking concessions from Israel, seemed in no hurry to lay down its arms.
Israel, on the other hand, was determined to cripple Hamas's military capabilities and deter future attacks, making a swift end to the fighting unlikely.
The path to a lasting peace remained elusive, but the urgency for ceasefire, even if temporary, was undeniable.
The humanitarian crisis in Gaza and Lebanon demanded immediate attention, and the risk of a wider regional conflagration loomed large. The world watched and waited, hoping for a diplomatic breakthrough that could end the bloodshed and pave the way for a more peaceful future.